Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy, Gsluke, here with our DFS and betting preview for this week's Zurich Classic. We'll mix in a little bit of LIV Adelaide talk too, if you have any questions down there in live chat, but stoked to get after it this week, and one that I frankly think is one that we can leverage and that we do have an edge for. So we'll talk about a few ways where I think you can capture that depending on the contest that you're entering. We'll talk some outright bets. I placed a few now that Hard Rock lowered their odds on a few players, so got a few better spots over there. And then for the prop board, we ended up getting some prize pick stuff for LIV Golf. We ended up getting some Zurich stuff. Zurich stuff over there on prize picks. And then over there, Underdog got the LIV Golf stuff. So I'm going to talk props, outrights, DFS, all of that here on this live stream, and excited to get into it. You got Philly, who's not going to be able to make it, but still wanted to say hi down there in chat. So, yeah, he's finished, in the top two, the last two community streams. That's pretty sweet. So if you didn't see, Snowman ended up winning last week and won a free month of the Patreon. So Snowman, I still need to get that to you, by the way. So if you're watching this, please hit me up on Twitter or down there in the comments, and I'll make sure to get you hooked up with that. But we're running it back for this week. So if you want a free chance to earn that Patreon, check out the link in the description. It's a $5 single entry. It's a low rate contest. So it's already one of the better contests that you can play out there for this week. And on top of that, if you win, you're not only going to win the money, but also that Patreon membership. So a little bit of extra ROI over there. So make sure you get in there. What's going on, Kamara? What's going on? Why I win? Big deal doesn't see a big edge. I think a lot of people will agree with you, but I disagree. So I think it's maybe a little bit of a lazy take to say that. So I'll explain further. So don't take that as a diss. I think a lot of people would agree with you, but I disagree. 8 Game says, enjoy being a Patreon. Well, I appreciate you for the little bit of a shout out. Said, appreciate all the work on the streams and behind the paywall. Absolutely, man. It's obviously it's my passion. I love covering DFS sports. So I'm glad that you're enjoying it as well. What's going on, Brant? Says Master Luke. What's going on, Brant? Hopefully you're having a solid day. And yeah, I'm doing well, man. Hopefully you're doing well yourself. So let me bring up the weather and we'll talk about why I think there's an edge this week. So I think people see a team event. They start looking at weather, they start looking at groupings, and they overcomplicate it. And for lack of a better way of explaining it, I think people get to a week like this and they forget how to play PGA DFS. They throw all the fundamentals out the door. They go out there, completely change how they play. And that is the exact opposite of what you should be doing. We still have waves to work with, which means there could be a weather edge out there. And we'll talk about that here in just a few minutes. And there's still a bunch of condensed ownership, right? Because it's such a lazy week. When it comes to the content, a lot of the same players get steamed up. So when I hear things like, oh, there's not an edge this week, I just don't think you're looking hard enough, right? There's a weather edge staring us right in the face. And there's also that game theory edge, which I think even some of my core plays are just steamed through the roof. So we're going to mention Xander and Cantlay, and I'm going to tell you that I'm playing them, but I would probably recommend fading them. So there are spots to go out there, leverage an edge this week. And it's not to say that you should go out there, play your same sort of exposure. I'm even dialing back what I'm doing in terms of DFS and from the outright angle, but it's not like I'm not going to play, right? It's not like I'm going to go out there and try and find these weather edges, because I do see a few avenues to take. So let's start with the weather. And I think the weather for this event, you might want to treat a little bit differently than most, because this Thursday round is a whole lot more important than what we have on Friday. In terms of the actual scoring at this event, rounds 1 and 3 are where almost all of your fantasy points are coming. And it's easy to break it down or see why that would be the case when it's a best ball format, right? And almost all of your Draftkings scoring, part of it comes from placement, right? But a majority of it, over your 72 holes, comes from your birdie production. And when you have a potential for 12 to maybe even 13 birdies in a best ball format, you're going to see some players take advantage of that, right? Go out there, shoot a nuclear round. In those 2 rounds alone, score probably 3/4 of their Draftkings points. So if you're going to try and find the weather edge, I think round 1 is the place to do it, right? Obviously, round 3, we don't have any control over that. There's a whole 2 rounds. The tee times get reseeded when they head into the weekend. But for rounds 1 and 2, if I was trying to find a way to leverage against the field, it would be for tomorrow, right? And the way that I see this, I think the morning could see that advantage. You see lower than 9 miles an hour wind the entire morning. In fact, it's usually closer to like 3 and 4 miles an hour of your sustained winds. Your wind gusts, they also kick up in the PM, right? It goes from like 6 to maybe 10 miles an hour of wind gusts up there to the 13 to 15 mile an hour range. And while this might not be a massive impact Still, you're going to have better, more pristine greens in the morning. You're also going to have more receptive conditions because you're out there in the morning hours. And I think that we're going to see a few guys threaten 59 out there in the morning, whereas I would be a little bit more surprised if they went out there and did that in the afternoon. So it's for a showdown, I would certainly be taking the morning guys tomorrow. And if that's going to be the most important day out of the first two, right? Alternate shot is what they're playing over there on Friday. It's a much harder format. You're not going to make nearly as many birdies. Having an edge for Friday would be great. But if we go over here to this NEM forecast, which is the most accurate about 48 hours out, you'll see that there could be a little bit of advantage, right, to going out early. You can see the winds do actually kick up in the morning hours that day. So it's not as big an advantage as what we have for Thursday. But then you have to add the fact that Friday is a lower scoring day, right? It's not where you're going to go out there and make and break your DraftKings week. That I'm not all that worried, right, about maybe an hour or two of calm conditions on Friday. So at least with how I'm looking at the weather, I think that if you want to favor anything, it'd be some of the morning starters tomorrow. Now, as a 150 maxer like myself, it's pretty easy to set like 30-35% of my lineups and just go out there and lean into that weather edge. The rest of them, right, play it pretty straight up. But if you're playing a 20 max, you're only playing a few single entries, I think there's a really good argument to be made to just go out there and play that weather edge. So I know a lot of people, maybe don't love this sort of week when it comes to playing DFS. I couldn't blame you, right? It's a ticky-tack format. It's wacky. I'll be watching more LIV this week than I will be over here on the PGA side. But I do think there's a little bit of an edge that you can capture, or at least a potential edge. I mean, who knows if it ends up coming to fruition, right? But it's setting up for a potential edge out there on the weather. And if that's going to be there, your boy's going to be trying to take advantage. Let's bring up our DFS stuff. We'll talk through some of the ownership there because that's the other part of the edge this week, right? If there's going to be a weather edge, that is always useful. But when you have a lazy week of content, like what we have here, where a lot of people that usually put out their stuff aren't even doing it, everyone's going to play the same guys. So when you're playing game theory, when you're going through trying to get leverage to the field, there are going to be some really obvious spots to do so. So that's what we're going to go through next. But before we do, let's catch up down there in chat. Which teams in the morning do I like? Well, I guess we'll mention a few as we go through it, but it's not really which teams you're playing, right? It's that process that's more important, right? Going after more of those morning guys. If I was playing a single entry, I would want at least 4 morning guys. So I think that's the more important question, right? Is how many should I take in a lineup? I would go with at least 4 in every single one. And, if you have 1 or 2 of the PM guys sneaking in, particularly if they're leverage plays that you're taking at lower ownership, then so be it. That's probably okay. But what I'm going to focus on here are some of the higher owned plays. And I don't have all my ownership on here. I'm going to keep that behind the paywall like we've been doing, something that's going to be a regular going forward. So unfortunately, right, if you're somebody that liked the free ownership, it was there for you guys to trial, but you know where to find it, right? It's over there on the Patreon version. Guys like Cantlay and Xander, I have at 40% ownership. Everyone else in the 10K range is like 10% owned. You've got them at next to no ownership. I would qualify all of them as leverage plays. So that would be a Rory, a Sahith, a Colin Morikawa, an Alex Fitzpatrick, Matt Fitzpatrick group. All of them are going to be sub 15% owned, or at least that's where my projections have them, right? Might be wrong. One might spike ownership like a Sahith and Will Zalatoris. That wouldn't surprise me as much. If there's any group that I think is going to get some extra steam, it would probably be the Sahith Zalatoris. They're 2 fan favorites. They're both playing pretty decent golf. So I could see that. But in any case, even if they are like 20% owned, right, they're half the ownership of a Patrick Cantlay and Xander. And rather than taking Patrick, Xander out there in pretty much every single lineup you're taking, or 75, 80% to get that leverage, you could take all 3 of these groups. So while on Monday, I kind of cornered myself in by making somebody like these 2 a core play, I'm highly debating fading these 2. And while it's not likely that I'm going to pivot all my exposure from these 2 down to at least 2, maybe even all 3 of these groups right below them, there's a really good argument to be made. And in fact, if I was only playing like 20 lineups, or if I was only playing like 5-6 lineups this week, I would almost for sure, right, take these lower owned players, because even if you get, Cantlay and Xander right, you're going to have to go out there and get your other 5 spots to the absolute nuts because they're 40% owned, right? Half the lineups are going to be starting with that same sort of player. So if I wasn't spreading a huge web of like 150 lineups, I'd have a much harder time playing this elite combination up top. So out there with this week, right, if you go out there, just fade those top 2, right, Cantlay and Schauffele, you go out there, you play that weather edge, take some of the morning tee times, I think you might have yourself a week out there for the GPP side. So I'm not saying it's that easy, right? These 2 could obviously go out there and win. They're an outright bet that I'm looking to get to. They got to plus 400 on Hard Rock, so they're getting close to the plus 450. That's what I'm looking for to actually fire on it. But we'll have to see if I play them out there in my large field GPP lineups. If somebody asks me what they should do with these two up top, right, my answer as of right now would be to fade them, right? Would be to go out there, take a shot on some of these lower owned players, because this is an extremely volatile format, right? Best balls, we're going to get all that fantasy scoring done. And what happens if Cantlay and Schauffele just happen to make birdie on all the same holes, right? If they only end up shooting something like a 64, a 65 out there tomorrow, so something like, 7, maybe 8 under par, that's not going to be enough, right, for somebody at $11,000 to set up well for the weekend, right? They're going to have to win the golf tournament to pretty much pay off at that price tag. And that's far from a given at this sort of golf tournament. So that would be my take up top with those two. As of right now, I'm still playing them myself. I do have plenty of pivots in the rest of my player pool, so that's why I don't have to go out there and fade those two. But there's a good argument to be made to go out there and do so. So, like I said, very good chance that I still end up playing those two, but a lot of that is a byproduct of what I'm doing with the rest of my player pool. Outside of that, this 9K range doesn't really have much chalk. I would say that Hoagie, McNeely, right, are one of the higher owned players, and they're only about 16.1%. And then you have the Hogard twins also coming in with about 15 to 20% ownership, but nothing that's too out of hand, right? There's no, Cantlay Schauffele group that you have to worry about in terms of ownership. Down here in the 8Ks, you can see a lot of the same. No one down here is really carrying that much ownership. So a lot of times in this, 9K range, 8K range, we'll have guys that are like double the ownership of everyone else. And that's not really the case. Dietrich, McIntyre are getting a little bit of steam. Even somebody like a Keith Mitchell, Joel Damon, right, are getting a little bit of ownership themselves. But really, if there's anyone you like down here in the 8, 9K range, you can get to them and feel pretty comfortable about it, right? Like even a Hoagie, McNeely that are getting some attention aren't egregiously high owned. So it's, again, I think the real big leverage spot up top, if you're going to do it and decide to get different up there at the top end of the board, right, it's pretty much these two, right? It's Cantlay, Schauffele, figuring out what you're going to do with those two players. And if you don't pivot up top like that, you're going to have to do it down low, right? You're going to have to force in a lot of lower owned plays to get that leverage. And that is exactly what I'm doing as of right now. So let's talk about that. So in this 8K range, guys like Hostler, Ryder, also Berger, Perez are still pivots out there, that kind of ownership. Eckert, Goddard are getting some steam at 14%. So they're not somebody I'm using for a bunch of leverage. But down here in this 7K range, and it's a lot of ugly ass teams, you've got players that are essentially unowned, right? And just to kind of point out a few that I think make sense, like a Dylan Wu, Justin Lauer. Like this is the perfect kind of Zurich Classic group. It's two guys that are just kind of like average guys, average Joes out there on the PGA Tour. They're $7,400. One's a really good putter. One's a really good iron player. So Lauer, the putter, of course, Dylan Wu, the really good iron player. So I think they could synergize quite well. I think the price tag's pretty fair, and no one's playing them, right? And they're not a sexy group. It's not saying that this group in particular, right, it's going to get the job done, but there are a lot of groups that you could say that about. A Kevin Streelman and a Martin Laird, you could say that about. Vincent Norman, Jorge Campillo, I think they really complement each other's skill set. There are a lot of just ugly ass plays down here in the 7K range that I know are going to get there, right? Not, each play in particular getting there. I mean, because I'm spreading a pretty big web down there in the 7K range, but every single year we come to this event, you have that random ass group that goes off. And it's not usually the ones that are coming in with the best form. It's not even usually a group that's very chalky out there that ends up hitting. It's usually just two solid form players. I think Wu and Lauer are like the perfect example of that, where they're not flashy names, but we've seen them pop up in first round leaders. We've seen them pop up at isolated events for top 10s, top 20s. You put two of them in the same group, you give them low ownership, and that's where you can go out there and differentiate your lineup. So I'll point out a few others. Right? I mentioned the Norman Campillo. That's one of my favorites to get to. This Ramey group down here. So where's Chad Ramey at? Down here with Martin Trainer. Martin Trainer, really good iron player, really good ball striker, right? Chad Ramey could just fill it up with the flat stick. Again, two guys that aren't flashy by any means, but they're low owned, but they still have that upside at this kind of event because it's that sort of golf tournament. And Eric Barnes, a Harrison Endicott, again, another just low owned group that no one's going to get to. That, again, I'm not saying that all of these guys are going to go off, but if one of those guys ends up finishing top 5, top 10, I'd be far from surprised. In fact, like, I'm expecting one of these random groups to pop off. And it's not like you're choosing these groups by random, right? Ideally, you want them to have some sort of form, right? So Eric Barnes has actually been pretty good here in 2024. Harrison Endicott, right, started this year on fire, right? Went out there and won Q School. So obviously he's been playing pretty well the last 3-4 months as well. The reason with Chad Ramey, Martin Trainer, right, both have popped off at random spots, right? In terms of form, they're top half players in this kind of field. So it's not like we're choosing these at random, but there are groups here that I would avoid, right? I mean, obviously, there are just groups with 2 stinkers that I don't think have any sort of chance. There's even going to be groups like that go out there and finish top 10, like the Hoffman-Watney groups that go out there and finish top 10 here all the time. Like Taylor Moore, I forget who his partner is that he always plays here with, but he'll come into here with like next to no form and then go out there and finish top 5. I think it's Matthew Neesmith that he was playing with. Matthew Neesmith, same thing, right? He'll come in with like no form and then pop off. So you're going to get that at a few spots, but the guys that I'm taking a lot of my shots on are the ones that have a little bit more form. So let's point out a few others. Peter Malnati, Russell Knox, not in the best form, but also not the worst. He's number 50 in recent form ranking. That's pretty respectable in this field. And then Peter Malnati has a win on his record, right? And the last month or so on tour. Let's find a few others here. S.H. Kim, right? He's playing pretty well. Now, Sang-Moon Bae, we haven't seen him, really at all, but he is still playing professional golf, especially over there on some of the Asian tour stuff. But S.H. Kim, right? He's a popper. The one group I would not play is Russ Crockman. If you don't know, Russ is like 65 years old. So that's the one group. I love Eric Cole. He's my boy and whatnot. But yeah, they should be $6,000 having a 65-year-old as your partner. That's obviously Steve Stricker, Matt Kuchar, right? That group's getting up there in age. They're not really that young, powerful group like you have with a few other cases. Russ Cochran is that plus 10 years. Parker Cootie Pearson. Cootie are some donkey chalk down here in the 6K range I'd avoid. They're $6,600 and they're like 12 to 15% owned. And I think it's some single entries. They could be like 15%. So one second, let me get a sip of this water here. Then let's go through some of the chalky guys because it's not all chalk up the top. There are a few chalky guys down here towards like the mid to lower end of the board. So one second, I'm bringing up my other spreadsheet actually, so I can go through ownership and make sure I point out all the chalky guys. So in terms of players that are getting exposure down low, I mentioned the Cootie brothers. I have the Cootie brothers at 11.3% ownership, but it's not just those two. So in terms of guys that are also getting steam, you have Alex Smalley, Matty Schmid that are surprisingly getting some ownership. Nick Hardy, Davis Riley, after their win last year, are getting some steam. Taylor Moore, Matthew Neesmith, because of the course history, are getting a lot of steam. So it's very predictable players, right? And it's the guys coming in with form. It's the guys with course history. It's your past champions, right? You have with a Hardy, Davis Riley. It's a lot of lazy analysis, which is why I do think that there is an edge this week. Whereas like Norman Campillo, which I think is the identical, if not a better play than a lot of those other guys, is only 6% owned. To give you an idea of ownership on some of the other pivots that we have, like an Eric Barnes, Harrison Endicott, are 3% owned, right? They're a third, sometimes a fourth of the ownership as some of the other chalky guys in that range. S.H. Kim as Sang-Moon Bae are 4% owned, right? So they're like half the ownership, a third of the ownership of the Cootie brothers there. And then even a group like a J.J. Spawn, a Hayne Buckley, I've got it 6% ownership. That's half the ownership of the Cootie brothers. And like, I know Hayne Buckley, not in the best form, right? Even J.J. Spawn, right? Not the best form. But J.J. Spawn's won on tour before. Hayne Buckley's been in contention at a major before, right? Out there at the PGA Championship and U.S. Open out there a few years ago. Like, give me that over some Korn Ferry Tour kids, right? They just came up. And I like the Cootie brothers. I think they have a bunch of potential, but they shouldn't be 15% owned, right? At this sort of golf tournament. So obviously I've seen a few pieces of content that have pointed out the Cootie brothers as a play, but they're far from a sure-owned prospect. And they're by far the highest owned players down low. So I would avoid those guys that are getting all of that attention. And like I said, you're not going to feel great about playing like an Eric Barnes, a Harrison Endicott. But if there's a week to do it, it's this kind of week. I mean, a Carl Wan, a Zichin Dow, right? Marty Dow, my boy down there, bucket hat guy, down there at $7,000, right? You could play that group on this given week, and I really wouldn't be against it. A Ben Silverman, a Kevin Doherty. Silverman, an absolute striper, tee to green. Doherty, absolutely just one of the longest players in this field. So you got a good combination there with those two. Like, these are the weeks where I'd be playing these ugly sort of players. So for me, I'm totally fine taking a Cantlay and a Schauffele up top because I'm going to have a shit ton of leverage down low, right? I'm not playing the Cooties. I'm not playing those guys that are going to be 10 to 12% owned when I'm having just 3% play after 3% play being mixed in, it doesn't matter how chalky I'm being up top. So that's why I'm still taking that stand. I guess if you are going to be chalkier, right, you're going to take the Cooties, you're going to take like the Taylor Moore Neesmith group that's coming in at 16%. It's probably a good idea to fade these two up top because, like I mentioned, the ownership's a lot more spread out for the guys down here in the 8, 9, and 10K range that aren't named those two. So it's going to be a little bit harder to go out there and find that leverage. So that's what I would say for Showdown. Again, just remember how to play PGA DFS. Just to circle back to the first thing I started out with, it feels like people this week just forget how to play, right? They forget about the fundamentals of playing PGA DFS, like a weather edge, right? Like targeting some of the early golfers. And to circle back on that, I meant to go through the tee times earlier because I didn't have them up on my spreadsheet. But these are some of your earlier tee times. And unfortunately, if you are going to play against that group that's 40% owned and fade Xander and Cantley out there, they're in the morning wave. So it's a little bit of a harder fade, in my opinion, when you have them in that weather edge. But you also have Thigala Zalatoris going off early. In terms of like the super early tee times, Novak Thompson should get a little bit of an advantage. You have Vegas Burgoon going off early, Higo Fox, Kevin Yu and CT Pan, the two Chinese Taipei players going off together. There's that Carl Wan, Marty Dow group that I was mentioning. All of these guys that are out there in the morning wave, and it is a defined wave, right? It's not like the signature events where they have tee times going off the entire day. There's 160 players that they have to get on the golf course. So we actually have those defined waves for once. So a whole 3-hour gap between the tee times. Anyone that's going off in the first half, I think gets a slight advantage. And if you're just joining us and didn't see before, it's because Thursday is by far the most important day because it's best ball. It's where almost all of your scoring is going to come from the first 2 rounds. And especially if you go over here to the HRRR model, you'll see the morning looks perfect. Afternoon, a little bit windier, right? Not crazy wind, not like, difficult golf course kind of wind by any means. It's still best ball. They're going to nuke the golf course, but I think you're going to see some lower rounds out there towards the morning hours. So that's it for DFS. We're going to talk through some lineup construction real quick and then hop over to the prop side where I do have some slips that we can enter, one for Zurich, one over there for LIV Golf. And we'll also touch on all of your DFS questions now as well. Let's see. You accidentally signed up for the 555 signature. What is that? So that's a qualifier to get into that 555. So it's one of the satellites that they run. So there are contests where you can go out there, try and win a prize pool. Sometimes first place will be a ticket into a different contest. So if you win, you'd end up getting a ticket into the other contest. Can I look at Cantley and Xander for birdies or better? And also with Sahith more than 64 strokes. Yeah, remind me when we get to props. We'll talk about some of that. What is going on, Kevin? Hopefully you're having a solid night yourself. And what do I think about Straka/Garnett and Roll Tide? Yeah, always hitting us with the Roll Tide, your favorite team out there. But yeah, Straka, Garnett, they're both coming in with solid form. So I think they kind of linked up at one of the recent events. They were both in contention at the RBC Heritage. So I'm not sure if they were paired together one of the last few days. But if they were, and I think there's a good chance that they were, at least it might have been Saturday that they were paired together. Maybe that's where they struck up a conversation about this week. But in either circumstance, both are in form. I mean, both were in contention at a signature event recently. So I think you could do a whole lot worse than playing them. Now, let me double check if I have them in my exposure. I'm pretty sure I don't, but I kind of wish I did. There are just other guys in that range I really like too. So let me double check and see if I actually got there myself. So yeah, I don't have them. There's that Nick Taylor, Adam Hadwin group. I have a little bit of a soft spot for, but yeah, man, that group seems like they're in really good form. So I totally get that one. You backed Hoagie and McNeely at a 40-1 on Monday. You think they're the best price in the 25s now? Yeah, you got some really good CLV there. Obviously, the each way is treated a little bit differently as well. But yeah, I like them this week. They're one of my core plays. So I'm right there with you. And I bet them at 25-1. So yeah, 40-1 on the each way is pretty sweet. Russ is older than Eddie Cochran. Yeah, they're up there in age, dude. He's like 60-something years old. So good story. And by the way, if you don't know why Eric Cole did that, Eric Cole's caddy is one of the Cochrans, right? So he's, I think Eric's age, right? He's probably like 25, 30 years old. And his dad's the one that's actually playing with Eric Cole. So it's kind of crazy. And right, he'll have his caddy there, right, playing with his father, right, as the other player in the group, which is kind of cool. King Luke, any edges this week? Yes. If you go back, I'll talk about a weather edge and some of the game theory stuff. So frankly, it's the same kind of week that I see for most weeks. I think people that are claiming there's no edge this week either want to be lazy because they want to take the week off. They want to go out there, go on a vacation, whatever the case may be. Maybe just go watch LIV Golf this week. Like, I don't know. People have their own motivations, right, for not taking this week seriously. It's PGA DFS. The scoring's the same, right? Like, I get, like, it's a different format. The ball goes in the hole a little bit differently. You're getting the same fantasy points. It's the same salary you have to work with, the same weather, right? There's different waves to work with in ownership. Like, it's all the same, right? Just go out there. Frankly, you could do the same thing you do for every single golf tournament, and you'd be just fine for this given week. It's all there this week. And I only react like that, Jeff. It's not, you're not the first one to ask. So that's why I say that. It's like, I don't get why people are preaching that there's not an edge this week. I just think they're trying to make it easier on themselves, right? And I'm not sure which content creators are saying that. I haven't watched a lot of content this week, but I imagine it's ones that are wanting to go on vacation or something, or wanting to do something else, right? So that's my take on it. Thoughts on the Hogard brothers? High upside players. They're obviously familiar with each other, being brothers. I think they're a decent play, but they are getting ownership, Sam. So I think a lot of that is narrative based. I think a lot of people just want to play them because they're brothers. They have to play well together, right? Matt Fitzpatrick played pretty well together last year. So maybe they're rolling into that narrative. But yeah, they are high quality players. I have to say that. How dirty does it feel to click on the 6K range? Extremely, man. I mean, it's nasty down there, but every single year you get a bunch of those guys that go off. And I think my favorites are like the Hoey group. Those two play together all the time. And then, like, there are some legit guys down there, like the Stanger, Adrian DeMonte Chissart group. Like, that's a legit group. Like, ADDC looked a lot better over there at the alternate field event. So maybe he keeps that going at this kind of wacky event too. Like, it's nasty, but there are spots that are less nasty compared to others, right? There are spots that you can at least click on. There's some spots that by no means I'd be touching on. Any hope for the Fitz bros? I'd say so. They played well here last year. Alex Fitz is playing even better now than he was before, right? Like, now he's playing legit professional golf, right? He was on the Sunshine Tour. Now he's playing a lot on the DP World Tour. Heck yeah, they have a chance. They're expensive, though. They're $9,700, so they're making you pay for it. That's for sure. What is the ownership on Lowry Rory? Let me double check for you. I know it's reasonable, but let me give you an exact number. I've got them at 19.1%. So, I mean, they're getting some attention, but it's about half the ownership of a Cantlay Xander. So, yeah, I'd say pretty respectable there. Just wanted to send some hope and prayers to our good friend DGen75. Absolutely. Agree with that too. So, yeah, obviously he's in our thoughts, everything like that. And, yeah, rounds 2 through 4 this week will be with Ship It Nation. So we'll definitely be thinking about him on those live streams too. As a Luke, what do we think about my fellow Luke in this Fields team? I honestly don't even know the Lukes off the top of my head, right? So do we even have a Luke list group? I'm pretty sure we don't, right? So we do have a Luke list group, and I'm playing them, so I should have known that off the top of my head. The Luke Donald Molinari group, too old. I can't do it, right? Now, could they make a cut? Yeah, I think Donald and Molinari could, but they're not going to win this event, right? Luke list Henrik Norlander, though, is like a match made in heaven, right? Norlander can be a pretty good putter. He's a solid iron player. Luke List is super long off the tee. And the other complementary skill set there, right, is that List is a power player. Somebody like Henrik Norlander is more of an accuracy guy. Oh, boy. Yeah, I like that group. But the Luke Donald Molinari group, oh, I don't know about that one. That seems like a little bit of a stretch to me. Let's talk about a little bit of lineup construction, and then afterwards we're going to talk about props. If you guys haven't already smashed that like button, go ahead and do so. I know it's a week for the tryhard, so I'm not going to have as many people down here in the live chat, but if you're here doing that research, that means that you're willing to put in the work. And like I said, a lot of people are going to take it easy this week. Again, for their, one reason or another. Maybe you just don't like this golf tournament. That's totally fine. I understand that. I empathize with that a bit, but doesn't mean that there's not an edge to be had. So go ahead, smash a like button if you're down in here. And frankly, if you're here, you're one of my people. If you're willing to get your hands dirty on a week like this. All right. So in terms of lineup construction, if you're fading Cantlay and Schauffele, right, I think it opens up just so much freedom with your lineup. So what we're going to do for the sake of this is actually take those two guys up top, because if you started a lineup by fading those two, right, by taking like a 20% owned guy instead, right, whether it's the Sahith Theegala group with Zalatoris or it's the Lowry Rory group, right, either one would be about half the ownership. if you start that way, I mean, as long as you're not taking 10, 15% owned guys with all 6 of your spots, you're probably just fine, right? So it'd be kind of boring to go through that because there's not as much thought needed. But if you're starting with like a Cantlay Schauffele, and then you're going down here and throwing in like a Hoagie McNeely as your second man in, that's a pretty chalky start right there, right? It puts you down to 73.5 in terms of your average salary remaining. And it's where you get to start to be a little bit more cognizant about ownership. And in this kind of build, it's why I mentioned taking like a Cootie Brothers would be a little bit detrimental, right? It's something that I would try to avoid in this kind of build, because if you went down here, sure, it'd save you some salary, but now you have another 13, 15% owned player down here in the 6K range. And now you've probably got to take a sub 5% owned player with your last 3 spots, which is just, I think, asking a little bit too much. So something maybe a little bit more reasonable would be to go up here and maybe throw in like a Suh and Hoey, right? About like 8, maybe 9% ownership on that pairing. So you're getting some leverage. You're also still saving salary by taking a $6,900 golfer. Go over here, you're throwing like a Chad Ramey, Martin Trainer, right? They'll be super low owned. So you're getting plenty of leverage there. You could go in and throw in another pivot, right? Maybe a Dylan Wu, Justin Lauer, right? I mentioned them being a potential play down there in that range. Now you're back up to $8,000 remaining. And because we have 3, for sure pivots, right? Like 3 groups that are going to be sub 10% owned. Even if we wanted to take a chalkier player up here, like an Austin Eckroat, a Goddard, we could make that work out there for a GPP. So this isn't necessarily a lineup I'm going to enter myself, right? Again, I'm just trying to show you guys the thought process of how I'm going through and building lineups. But a lot of it's going to be done by hand, right? Again, I'm not entering as many lineups this week. It's going to be 50 out there for my exposure. And a lot of them are going to be built by hand. So if you're avoiding Cantlay and Schauffele up top, again, your life's a little bit easier. So let's say you started with like a Thigala Zalatoris. Your second man in was still maybe even like a Hoagie McNeely. So still somebody with some ownership. Now you can afford to take guys that are, maybe getting a little bit more steam. So for example, going here to like a Straka Garnett, right, that are getting some attention this week. Going down here to the 8K range and taking like a Thompson Novak, right, that are also getting some ownership this week. Heck, you could probably even throw like a Cootie Brothers right into this kind of lineup. And as long as your last man in here in the 6K range, is somebody that's sub 5%, this lineup is going to have more than enough leverage. So I just think it gives you a little bit more freedom down low, right? If you go out there and avoid those top tier players, right? Cantlay and Schauffele out there, but it's not something that I'm willing to do. So it's all based on your style, right? If you want to differentiate down low, go ahead and take those 2 guys up top. If you want to differentiate towards the top end of the board, take more chalk down there towards the bottom, then obviously that avenue is available to you as well. So I think that, it's a tough week, right? It's at least from the entertainment factor, right? It's one that I probably won't even watch that much golf from. But from an exposure perspective, I'm at like 65% of my normal exposure. So it's not like I'm completely shying away from playing this kind of week. Maybe a few less lineups because my player pool is smaller, right? There's only 80 teams to choose from. So it's pretty hard to build 150 lineups, right? Unless you're playing like 35 to 40 of those teams. So like half of them, which at least to me is just a little bit too crazy, right? It's not something that I really want to do. So I'm scaling it back a little bit for that reason, but still one that I think you can go out there and find an advantage for. So that's what I'll say for lineup construction. We'll go over any last second questions for DFS and then go through all of that prop stuff. Maybe you mentioned this before, but is this a distance or an accuracy course? It's plenty long. So let me go ahead and show you just the breakdown by hole. So let's just go over here to the leaderboard, right? Click on a player. Like hole 10, right? 390. That's not so bad. Let's actually just start a hole 1. So holes 1 and 2 aren't so bad, right? 390 and then 561. 3 is 226. 4 is 471. 5 is, medium length par 4, but 470 at hole number 6. Hole 8 is a shorter one, but like hole 9 is 200 yards, right? Go to the back 9, 390. Okay, short. Another par 5. Okay, that's a pretty easy hole. But 490, right? 400, so shorter. But 220, right? 490. Short. There are some shorter holes, like 16, right? Pretty short, right? But 215, right? A long par 5 to end it out there. I think you need to be accurate and you have to be long. The reason why I say accurate is there's a lot of water out there at TPC Louisiana. There's water on like, I think 12 of the 18 holes, maybe even more than that out there for the 18 hole setup. And then it's a long course. It's like 74, nearly 7,500 yards. So I think you have to have both. I think it's like a low key ball striking week that some people overrate. Like I think a lot of people look at putting this week, thinking that it's more of like a putting contest because of the winning score. And that's not necessarily the case. Like, sure, the scoring comes because it's a best ball format, but you still have to hit those iron shots close on like 400-yard holes, like a 492-yard par 4. Like, you're looking to make a birdie in the best ball format. The guys that have the best chance of doing so are, in my opinion, the power players. So that's a great question that you asked, because it's one that I think a lot of people get wrong for this event. I think a lot of people look at the, more accurate guys. I think they look at the more putting first sort of players. And that's not necessarily what I'm looking for this week. Let's say that much. All right, let's talk about some prop stuff. So for props, we don't have a full board on every single site yet. So if you guys are just here for DFS and you're hopping on out of here, first off, salute to everyone out there. Best of luck with all of your lineups this week. Best of luck with your outrights, any prop slips that you're entering if you're going with that too. And the only thing I ask before you're hopping out of here is to smash that like button. So go ahead, hit that before you hop on out of here, and subscribe so you don't miss the content throughout the weekend. We are not done with this content. So we have a LIV Golf board over here on Underdog, and I'm going to refresh this because I'm assuming they're going to add something for PGA at some point. So we'll have to see if they've done that for us. I've given them some time to go out there and try and post something. So there's no PGA tab here on the left, so probably not there. And so no PGA posted yet, but we do have that over here on Prize Picks. So Prize Picks has some stuff posted for strokes that we can take a look at. They also have some birdie or better matchups that you could potentially add as well. And let me see if they've added LIV Golf. So let me refresh this too. And by the way, pick'ems are back in Florida. So I know the last few live streams, the last month or so, right, I haven't been able to play stuff myself, but now I can. So on Prize Picks, they still have me to a $5 limit. So my main account, at least, right, I can only enter $5 slips, and I'll just wink at you a few times on that one. But over here on the Underdog side, I'm back to a $100 limit, and we can play for money again, which is huge. And I see quite a big of an edge over here. So let's start with Prize Picks. We'll go through that one to start because, we're talking about this PGA event first. Then we're going to talk about LIV Golf. It was an under on Cantlay and Xander at 64 strokes. And then it's an under on the Tom Hoge McNeely group. So these two are going off early. The scoring average in round one of best ball last year was about 65.5 strokes. There was some wind out there, right? Particularly the PM wave out there on Thursday was a little bit windier than what we're used to seeing. So I'm expecting the scoring average to be the same, if not slightly better here this year. So something probably 65, maybe 65 and a half strokes. And, a group like Cantlay and Schauffele, right, project for like 2.5 shots gained per round. So that puts them closer to like a 62.5, maybe even a 63 projection. So well under 64 strokes. And Hoge McNeely, it's not like they're going to project for 2.5 strokes gained to the field, right? Closer to like 1, maybe 1.5 to the field there. But that puts them at a 63.5, 63 projection as a group, which I think is pretty reasonable for this kind of field. So the added bonus with these two is that they have early morning tee times, right? They're not in that PM wave that's going to be a little bit windier out there for the first day. So they'll have the receptive greens. They'll also have lower winds to work with. And, obviously the average for the entire round one last year was like 65.5. The morning wave, though I couldn't split it by wave, was probably closer to 65, right? The PM wave was probably closer to 66 strokes. That's usually, right, how do we get to those kind of scoring averages, which would make these even better value in terms of a combination. So the way they have it down here in Florida is it's an arena mode. So it's kind of like Underdog where you're playing against a group of other people. So if we just get this perfectly right, we'll get the 2.75x at the very least, but there's a chance this could pay up to an entire 3x payout. So the way that I see this on both of these sites is it's actually probably advantageous compared to what we had before, because if anything, we have room to go out there and make even more money than we would otherwise, because at the very least, you're going to get this 2.75x. So I thought that was worth taking. I think this arena mode makes these correlated slips potentially even more valuable. So we'll have to see how all the payouts work. Obviously, I haven't even had one of these cash yet because they just activated it down here in Florida and we haven't played a correlated sport like golf yet. So we'll have to see how all of that works out. In terms of Underdog, right, we've had the free slips over here, so I have a much better idea of how this site works. But I think a lot of value here. And I guess that's it for PGA. Right? If you have any PGA questions, let me see if you have them down in chat. Because if not, we're going to start talking about some LIV stuff. Because I know we had some stuff before. So you're looking at the birdies are better matchup for those two. So yeah, they're against Cantlay and not against Cantlay. Against Zalatoris and Thagala. I think that's a decent spot for an over, but I do prefer the strokes line, right? Where you don't have to play against another elite tier group. And the other ones we were looking at were Will and Sahith for more than 64 strokes, and then Stricker and Matt for over 66 strokes. So I was looking at the Stricker and Matt one. The only reason I might stay away from it is like the scoring average is going to be 65.5. So I could see them easily pushing it 66. The Will and Sahith one I like a little bit more, but they're a morning tee time, right? That's the issue, right? If these guys were in the PM, if they were like a 2 p.m. tee time, like a McIlroy and Shane Lowry, I'd be much more about it. So if I was going to fade anyone here, right, I would make it a group that's in the PM, right? Like a Shane Lowry, potentially even like a Colin Morikawa, Kurt Kitayama group down here, right? I would like for a fade over somebody that's going in the morning. So if you're still around here, Mark, that's what I'll say about those props. The fades, I'll be looking for some of the PM guys. And just to double check, are Steve and Kuchar? Yeah, they're AM as well. So that's another reason where I'm maybe not as excited about fading those two, is because they do have that morning tee time, and conditions in the morning are going to be absolutely perfect. So it's they're going to be making a lot of birdies, especially in the best ball format. I'll say that much. Let's see, anything else in terms of props? Okay, let's do this. So in terms of LIV Golf, let's bring up the Adelaide weather. Weather looks beautiful over there in Adelaide. So this is just the city of Adelaide. The golf course they're playing is, I believe, on yonder. Let me see. It's Grange Golf Club. It was easy to find before. We'll find it here. Because we got to pick the right spot. It actually, yeah, there it is. Okay. So here's Grange Golf Club. This is where they're going to be playing out there for the LIV Golf event this week. You'll see that today it's actually pretty windy over there. So if they were playing today, they'd be dealing with pretty windy conditions. But if you go over here to the Access model, which is the best one for local weather there, you'll see that on Friday it looks perfect, right? It's like 60 degrees. It's pretty mild the entire day. And your wind gusts, your sustained winds are pretty much non-existent. So this golf course is going to get absolutely torched, because let me go ahead and actually stop sharing my screen real quick and bring up some of the LIV Golf stats from last year, because they absolutely torched Adelaide. I mean, it was the easiest course on their schedule last year. And that is saying something when you're talking about a LIV Golf event, because there's a ton of scoring when it comes over there. So scoring average for the week was 2.87 under par. Day one was the quote unquote hardest, playing 1.86 under par. Day two played 3.7 under par. And then round three out there on Sunday played just over 3 strokes under par. So you're talking about one of the better scoring averages that you're going to find. The weather for Friday looks just about perfect. It's a short golf course. So let me go ahead and actually bring up the LIV Golf website. If you haven't seen my LIV Golf breakdown, I actually have a whole video up on my golf channel going through what to expect this week. Had a little bit of extra time, so figured I'd do so, right? Go through some of that content. But the golf course, if you didn't watch last year, which it was probably the best event that LIV had. They had the most fan support, that's for sure. Down there in Australia, it's an under 7,000 yard par 72, right? Normally these par 72s, like this week, the Zurich Classic, right, is like 7,400 yards. It's nearly 500 yards shorter. I mean, your par fives, one of them is only 529 yards. One of them is only 514 yards. You have multiple drivable par fours, like hole 4 can be drivable. Hole 8 can be drivable. Hole number 18 can also be drivable if they move up the tee box, and they did do it for a few rounds last year. Round 2, you saw that nuclear scoring because they moved up those tee boxes. And like even the par 3s, it's like 136 yards. It's 165 yards. It's like 173 yards down here at hole number 14, and that's if they use the back tee box. And again, just kind of like the par 4s, they moved up the tee boxes quite a bit over there for Lagrange. You just see absolutely nuclear scoring. So when we go over here to Underdog, right, it's a par 72. You'd think a lot of these guys are too low. They're absolutely not. In fact, a player like Paul Casey is somebody I'd take for an under at 69.5. And then Sebastian Munoz is the other one I'm looking for. So let me see if I can find his prop on here. Did they take him off? No, he's right there. There at 70.5 strokes still. Or guys I have projected clearly towards the under. So the scoring average rate was nearly 3 under par last year with the perfect conditions. I think something at least 2 under par is what we're going to see, probably closer to the 3 under par mark there. So if it's a 3 under par scoring average, that would be 69 strokes, by the way, because it's a par 72. Somebody like Paul Casey, right, could shoot an average round to go out there and cover. And Sebastian Munoz, right, could lose a stroke to the field and go out there and cover himself. And if you didn't see my LIV course breakdown, LIV breakdown in general, I'm going to go ahead and actually bring up that spreadsheet right now and show you guys why I like those two in particular. So as part of that spreadsheet I posted, this is out there for my Patreons, just like I have out there for the main slate stuff over there for the Zurich Classic, is we have the shots gained metrics out there for LIV. And what I'm going to look at in particular for these two, right? First off, the shots gained total. So Sebastian Munoz, right, gaining 0.99 strokes per round. So pretty much a stroke per round over there on LIV Golf. If that's going to be the case, right, and the scoring average is going to be 69 strokes, that would put him at a 68 projection, right? If he's going to be an entire stroke better than that, right? And even if it only plays like 2.5 under or even just 2 under par, that would be at worst, right? Hardest possible course conditions, right, are probably like 2 under par. If it plays 2 under par, that would put him at a 69 projection, right? As opposed to his projection at 70.5 over there on Underdog. If we're taking a look at a few other plays on here, the other one that we ended up taking, right, was, of course, Paul Casey, who's been gaining over 1.5 strokes per round. So again, if we do the same sort of math, right, maybe the hardest scoring, possible, right, would be like a 70 average. And that would be like if the greens are way more baked out, then we're thinking maybe if they use some harder pin locations for Friday, right, first round over there for LIV. Maybe it does only play like 2 under par. Even if that happens, right, and he's gaining a stroke and a half on average, right, out there to the field, that would put him at a 68.5 projection, right? And on Underdog, he's at 69.5 strokes. Now, when you consider that the scoring average might be 2.5 under par, maybe even an entire 3 strokes under par with the perfect weather that they're expecting, you can see why I think that these are like 2, sometimes even like 2.5 stroke discrepancies. So those are 2 props that I'm taking on Underdog. Those are actually the only props that I've taken so far, but we ended up getting the prop boards just before I went live, maybe like an hour and a half before I went live on there. So there will probably be a lot more slips to come. So if you're a part of the Patreon page, that's where you can get access to those spreadsheets, what I'm doing for PGA and over there for LIV, and to get access to all of my prop analysis over there for LIV and PGA as well. So the shameless plug aside there, that is where you can find the content for the rest of the week. But let's go over any questions you have down there in chat. You locked in that Cantlay and Xander less and that Tom and Maverick pretty better matchup. There you go. Will there be any showdowns? There will be. So I'm not sure if DraftKings is going to do it for the team event. I'm imagining that they will. Right, that they're going to post salaries, probably do it the same way. But if not, it'll be a LIV showdown stuff for the weekend. So there should be, I would say that there's like a 99% chance that we're going to have those. And until I see otherwise, until they don't give us showdown contests, that would be the only thing, right, that would keep us from doing a live stream. So yeah, we should be good to go on that. So subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss any of that when it drops. That is all I've got for tonight, guys. I've got a few things to get to over here in the Luke household. So best of luck out there to all your exposure you're getting to. If you haven't already smashed that like button, go ahead and do so. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those live streams throughout the weekend. Looking forward to it. Again, I think it's a week where if you dive in, you get your hands dirty a little bit. You can find an edge both out there for props and for DFS. So don't be shy about it, right? If you have any questions about this after the fact, maybe you're watching this on replay, go ahead, throw those down in the live chat for me, and I'll try and get back to you before lock if possible. So appreciate your support here as per usual, everyone. Best of luck out there with all the exposure that you're getting to. And I'll see you guys for that content throughout the rest of the week.